Hello, listeners. Welcome to Workplace Wellbeing. I am Bob Batchelor. I am the Vice President of Global Marketing and Communications at Workplace Options. And we're going to have a great episode here today with Rivkah Sherman. Before I begin, this episode is sponsored by the Workplace Options Center for Organizational Effectiveness. This is a new think tank and consulting hub that Workplace Options has launched recently to help organizations create better effectiveness and stronger employee engagement. For more information on the COE, please visit workplaceoptions.consulting.com. We're proud to have them as a sponsor today. So, before we get started, Workplace Options and our CEO, Alan King, very much central on employee engagement. It's an important piece of the puzzle at Workplace Options, as is psychological safety and inclusive leadership. Alan's constantly trying to create a culture and build a culture that is based on people being able to bring their full authentic selves to work. This is what he deems, and we at Workplace Options deem, integral to organizational success. Part of that success, I believe, is celebrating the victories and the wins and the accomplishments of our great teammates. And so often we hear it referred to as employees, other names like that. I like to always think teammates, because no matter where we are in the world, for Workplace Options, there's 1,400 of us around the world. We're all teammates. So Rivkah Sherman has had recent great success publishing an article in Organization Development Review called A Microcosm of Belonging Amidst Global Multilingual Organizations. And as a semi-lapsed academic and writer myself, I love to hear about people's writing journeys and what they are fascinated with. And then also the cool thing that this is a case study, and Rivkah has such a fascinating background. I couldn't even go into all the details because it's so cool. So I'll let her, Rivkah, welcome. And I hope I didn't overdo it, but I would love just if you would share a little bit about yourself, your role at WPO, and the kind of things that make you tick.
Well, thanks, Bob. So I am a certified coach with WPO, and I'm also recently, since I completed my master's degree, which this article that we're talking about is the thesis for, I'm also taking on some change projects with the company. So I'm getting to do even more cool stuff with our teammates all over the world. What makes me tick? I mean, I'm really interested in how we can be better together overall. And if you look at my career journey, it didn't really make sense when I started, but I was a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher, and I owned a bed and breakfast, and I made my living doing retreats all over the world. And then I realized that was not going to help me retire. So I started working with well-being in corporations. And they were really grateful for it. And then I discovered the world of employee well-being and did a bunch of school, but still it's the same, right? Whether I'm having a coaching session or I'm hosting a retreat, or now I'm hosting a meeting, and change processes is how can I welcome people? How can I have people belong and make that magic happen? The term collective effervescence comes to mind. So that's what really makes me tick. Yeah, like how can I architect a situation that engenders collective effervescence?
That's great. I love that. And one of the things that I saw on your website, because I'm incessantly curious when we do these podcasts about what people are doing and what kind of things they're putting out into the world, you touched on it, but you called yourself earlier an experience architect. Do you still feel like an experience architect?
I mean, even more so. And anyway, I don't think I'm actually allowed to call myself that in Quebec, where I'm from, because architect is a protected title. But for listeners globally, yes, I am an experienced architect, and that's an old website, and I did the branding a long time ago, so I'm kind of embarrassed that you even looked at it. But the same thing is true, right? I as a coach, what I'm ultimately doing with clients is helping them remember that they are the architects of their own experience, and there, of course, are circumstances in everybody's lives that we cannot change, but what we can change. And this is also true in the workplace. And I think we're getting to employee engagement. And a lot of the work I'm doing with WPO now is how to help employees feel like they are the architects of their experience and to what extent they are, right? Be realistic about that. Of course, we're in a hierarchy, but especially at WPO with a leader like Alan King, we're leveling that out and we're trying to figure out, right, how we can, and that's one of the reasons, we all love Alan, but one of the things I really respect about Alan is his strong desire to have employees' voices be heard. And this is how this project, came to be in this article.
That's great. So you gave us some clues there and a little bit of hints. So you earned your master's degree. That's fantastic. And this a piece of your thesis, or was this most of it, or is this a culling of the best parts?
So the master's I did was a practical one, and it required a final project that you had to publish on. And so what this was, and we're not allowed technically to work with our employers because it was a conflict of interest. So I had to go to the ethics review board and say, well, I love my company. Like, for the first time, I love the company I work for. So why would I go do free work for anybody else? When there's this great opportunity of the work that we're trying to do here. So this was the project. And, I had been with the company for 6 months when Workplace Option hosted their first service delivery summit. And I just got lucky. Like, I got to fly to head office and meet everybody. And, I think I just passed the cusp of eligibility by like 2 days. And when I got there, I was, deep in my master's program about how we can do authentic, change, employee-centered change. And here was this global company doing this thing where they were flying people from all over the world to ask them how we can make our company better. And it really clicked for me because I'd been doing theory, and reading, and it was so confusing going back to school in your 30s. And part of that experience, I was like, oh, it's making sense now. Right. So Workplace Options actually brought to light, like, oh, this is what we're trying to do. And I was able to look at it and say, I think I can do this even better if you'll let me. And that's one of the amazing things about our company. I just walked up to the CEO and said, hey, can I run this next year for free? Like, will you let me as a project? And they said, okay, so that's what this was about. And now we're here.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I think it speaks to Workplace Options culture, that it's a big company, but it still feels like a more intimate company. If you're in Raleigh in the headquarters, you see Alan and the CEO, you see other members of the C-suite just walking around, engaging with our teammates, and people are overtly friendly. And I think maybe that's just the nature of the business we do. Most people are do-gooders. It's pretty lofty, and I'll say this for you and for others that don't know my background. So I was a professor for 16 years and spent a lot of time working with graduate students at the master's and the PhD level in both academic settings and master's degree programs that were a little more practical based. So there wasn't as much theory, more like how do we get things done and done better. So I know, but listeners may not know, it's quite a lofty goal to get a master's project published. What was the impetus there in taking that next step of that? That's really, now you might know the statistic better than I do, but I would say you're in the upper, easily 3% of people who get a project like this published. So I'm not trying to put you on a pedestal or anything, but it is a fantastic it is a fantastic success and accomplishment. So I wonder just what was the thinking there?
So one of the reasons I published, Bob, is because I do have aspirations one day to have a PhD. Maybe I just think it would be really impressive. So that's one reason, and I wanted to look good at work. And here I am, right?
Sure.
I think I was just so grateful for the privilege of being able to do this work, and the amount of time that everybody gave me, and how valued, and we'll talk about one of the things of belonging I was made to feel. It mattered to me. I wanted to make Alan proud. I wanted to make Daryl and Molly feel like the effort that they had put into me was was worth it.
Well, that's fantastic. The PhD question, that's one that maybe we'll have that one at a different time. I went back to get my PhD, quote unquote, later in life. And it's something I wouldn't trade for almost anything. It's one of my proudest accomplishments as a human being. So I definitely understand the vibe, even though the mountain, the PhD,
work,
Mount
right?
Everest. Yeah. It's a lot of work, but having this article though will definitely turn people's heads if and when you do decide to apply to PhD programs. This will help you quite a bit, definitely. So what for people who haven't read the article, it's in a kind of an academic professional journal, so it's most people won't have read it, but Microcosm of Belonging in a global multilingual organization, which we know is Workplace Options, was your case study. What did you see at that initial summit that you then wanted to use as a lens the next year when you started putting the project together?
I mean, I think that's a big question. What did I see at the summit? And before I also want to, so I don't forget, I want to acknowledge my academic supervisor. Her name is Rosemary, and she works at Concordia University in Montreal, and she is an absolute saint for putting up with me. And I think the irony of this is that when I first took on the project, I wanted to do it all by myself. And she was like, no, Rivkah, it's not dialogic organizational development if you do it on your own. And I was like, why? I don't understand. And, she really had to tell me, because I'm so hard-headed, as are most smart people. She really had to keep on telling me the same thing again and again until I finally got it. But it was only through going through the process, Bob, that I really got it. And it was like, it clicked for me. The whole kind of thesis of my 2 years master's is it actually is better if we do it together. And it's one of those things that I just didn't believe until I lived it. And that's what my article is about. I really thought that it would be better if I could just orchestrate it all, because I went through school and we did all this group work, and yeah, group work is great, but it's also like meetings and coordinating and sharing and discussing. And I thought, oh, this will be my chance. And then my thesis supervisor was like, no, you need a group. Not only that, you need a group that's like selected ethically and like you can't even pick your own group. It has to be a microcosm, like a mini version of the company. And at the end, like, I love these people. Most of them are still with the company, and we won't mention their names because we haven't gotten there, but they were like these people who I've never met, right? Which is fascinating, except for one of them. And we worked together all over the world on this small project. But like we became friends, and I had no idea how I could have possibly done it without them. And just for dramatic element, my grandmother, who was aged, and to be fair, I don't want to make anybody feel bad, but she passed away the first day of the summit. And
oh wow,
like I then stepped away more so than I would have had that not happened. And my stepping away, these people, this 8-person committee who I had sort of just architected, they just showed up. And I was like, wow, what would have happened if I was solo on this? Like, it would have crashed. And yeah, it was really this idea of it might be a little bit slower. It's such a cliche, but it's so much better to watch people, especially in an organization as complex as ours, right, where we have all these departments and from different countries. It's actually lunacy that like when I look back on it, it's comical that I thought that I could organize on my own, a summit, because I read some articles, that I could do it by myself.
Yeah, the complexity of the challenge must have been initially, smart people think they can carry the world on their shoulders. I'm frequently surprised at the overwhelming complexity of the organization, not in a bad way, but just in how one thing touches so many other pieces, and frequently pieces that I don't even think about initially. Did you, going through the process, did it feel typical, like other projects you've worked on and other kind of things you've done in the corporate world? Because most things you don't imagine are going to end up as a master's project and someday an article. So there was probably, I would imagine, some extra pressure on you. But was it like reality TV where it's at one point you just forgot the premise of what you were doing and everybody was working together? I wonder how the dynamics of the group worked out and then how that was playing with your mind.
I think it was different in that I was shocked at how much leeway I was given. I was like, really? You're going to let me do this? Really? And I mean, that's like, WPO, how much leeway we were given. And it was sort of my job to just be the bridge between, the leeway and the folks, to say like, okay, so we can do whatever we want within this parameter, right? We have 1 week, we have this many people, we have this much time, we have this much money, this is what we can do. But after that, like the trust that, that Alan and Molly and Daryl and everybody, like, reverence is a strong word, but it was almost like, okay, whatever. And that was really unique. And I think that's why I knew I wanted to do my project with Workplace Options, is because that's what makes collaborative change happen. Like, you have to actually trust your employees that they know what's best, that they're, and then put them, within, because all we did was host conversations, right? It's not like the employees decided, we're going to do this. It was about having conversations and allowing them to use their intelligence and also their experience, and then to be listened to. And that was it. Like, the executive showed up. They showed up to hear people's ideas. And what I loved about it was how excited they were to hear them. I thought that was so beautiful. Like, there are people who are in our C-suite that I don't think that your average counselor knows who they are necessarily or knows their names. Mm-hmm. But they showed up and they were on camera, and they looked so pleased to be there, like to be there and to hear, like Virgin and, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting their names, but they looked like delighted, just delighted to be talking to employees about these problems that they probably spend so much time thinking about, and whether the answer was right or wrong. Like, so that was really unique. I think it was really neat. And that's where I found I was like successful, as I wanted to create an opportunity for the VP of our company to have a brainstorming session with the person who delivers the service, and then everybody in between, and for them to come up with a suggestion, and then implement it. And we're still working on implementing those suggestions now. So yeah, that was different. Did I answer your question? I feel like I'm babbling.
You did. No, you're not babbling at all. This is fascinating because it touches on so many of the things, running communications and the kind of thing that you're doing. We toss these words around so frequently, and it's, on one hand, I think, well, why isn't everybody doing this? Or why doesn't everybody care about this? And on the other hand, there's like the actual running of a business that has to be profitable, and we're taking ideas that end up on a spreadsheet somewhere and kind of trying to humanize them. So it's fascinating to hear your not only that this was a case study, which I think makes it infinitely more interesting than just the exploration of a theory or something like that, but that you got the human reaction and saw that then over time, some of these things that were suggested could become, real. And that's important. A microcosm of belonging. So maybe you could talk to the audience a little bit about your notions of that word belonging, because it is used quite frequently. I wish more C-suite leaders authentically cared about belonging. Maybe I'm too pessimistic when it comes to that, but that's my thoughts. So I'm not trying to put my thumb on the scale in any way, but I would love to hear your thoughts about belonging and what that means, kind of in an organizational context and culturally, et cetera.
So I want to preface this answer by saying I think often, we refer to belonging as part of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it was interesting when I started researching belonging, how little research was done on just belonging. Just belonging. That's not necessarily in that DEI kind of space. Because, and the idea for this sprung from a friend of mine who works out of Halifax, where I spend my summers, and he owns an HR company of some kind. His name is Bradley Day, and he gave this DEI workshop, but he started it on belonging. And it was fascinating because, whether people are listening, like I'm a cis hetero white woman. And so I often felt like I don't have a voice when it comes to belonging. Like I am not allowed, or I shouldn't have an opinion about this because I don't know what it's like not to belong. But Bradley made me remember that, of course, I know what it's like not to belong for all of the different reasons, whether I'm neurodiverse or I'm an only child, or I've been the first person at school, or I'm a new person in a company. And by centering it, making it about belonging and about diversity and equity and inclusion, but really about belonging, it just lit me up inside. And I was like, yeah, that's what actually matters. Why would I choose to do this project with workplace options and nobody else? Because I feel like for the first time in my life, I belong in a workplace. And I have late diagnosed ADHD. I am a very creative person. I'm different for sure. And I've worked for a bunch of companies, but not before workplace options did I feel like I was seen and heard and appreciated for the things that I brought. And that's really what got me thinking, like, how do we have employees be their best? Well, they need to feel like they're part of something, right? And how do you feel like you're part of something? Is being seen and heard. That's what came up in the research, and also what came up, when I asked folks, both during the summit and the people organizing it, like, when do you feel most engaged? And it came up as when I feel like people are listening to me, when I feel like my opinion matters, when I feel like I can ask for help without being judged. And those are the same things that come up when we ask people what belonging is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What I love about this is I spend so much time writing about these things. I'm constantly working on white papers and articles and speeches and all these things. But to hear it in, case study format, to hear it coming from somebody who clearly cares, it puts a new perspective on it. One of the things that came out of the WPO acquisition of the diversity movement late year and a half, not this past fall, but the fall before, was the creation of what we call internally an employee engagement model. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about the employee engagement model, and it really is a way to structure thinking about employee engagement, because we know from studies that, I think the last studies I saw, maybe 20% of the people globally employees felt engaged at work. And that just leads to all kinds of bad things. People are, if they're disengaged, they're probably, maybe a little more haphazard, which leads to safety issues. There whole list of things that happen because of that. And as you were speaking, in the individual needs section so what does a person need to feel engaged? They need well-being, they need belonging, they need trust, and they need professional development. And I think well-being, trust. I think we've hit all four, right? We've hit all four with your experience. So I love the fact that not only did you say you love working at WPO, but you said I belong. And you found a place where you personally feel like you belong. And so I could use you as a case study in writing a paper about this employee engagement.
We can co-write it, Bob. I need more. We can co-write it for sure. There's a word for that too when you write it from a first person. Yeah, and I think that we talk about employee engagement and what does it mean to belong? It's not only feeling seen and heard, and this is what happened in the planning committee, and it's what happens on my team at WPO, and it's what happened in my cohort in my master's. That was like my big lesson is that ultimately when the going gets really tough, what's going to keep me showing up and keep me engaged is that I care about the people that I'm working with. Mm-hmm. And that just like you asked me, why did I want to publish, is because I value the people I work with's opinion of me. And I know that they'll celebrate my successes. And so that's also what belonging is. And it's interesting, the research that I cited in my article, it's not enough to just sit around as a committee and talk about stuff. You have to do work together to have belonging happen. And that's what's really interesting because, we all sit on boards. I'm sure you sit on many boards and we are part of committees. And when I say the word committee or design by committee, there's always an eye roll. Like wherever you are listening to this, I can hear you rolling your eyes. And that's okay, right? It gets a bad rap, but it's important that the work gets done. And so this was the planning committee that actually did the work. And that's where belonging happens. It's in the work. So pieces of work actually got created spontaneously after a meeting. It wasn't a meeting just to have a meeting. Somebody's like, okay, I'll draft this. And then somebody's like, well, I'll proofread it. Great. I'll translate it into my language. And that's when we really had to flex as a global organization, Bob, because it's as hard as it is, you work with people in India and Australia, but if I draft something at 4 p.m. and then when I come back to work the next day, it's been reviewed by my 2 colleagues in 2 other time zones, that's when the magic really started to happen. So I think that's an interesting piece about belonging too. And it's not just about talking or sitting on committees or having a group session. It's about doing work together. Yeah, that's great too, because when you go up the scale, the employee engagement, the model is built like a pyramid with employee engagement at the top. So it's really designed to help leaders and employees understand, how do you get to employee engagement? Much of that work is through teams, as you found out. Personally, I'm the same. I'm similar to you in that I think I can do it all myself. But it's never as powerful as when it's a team of us working. So the team outcomes are collaboration, innovation, retention, and productivity. So you said most of the people are still here. I would imagine that this experience made them feel good about themselves and WPO. You definitely were innovative. You just explained a productivity through collaboration. So, it's this is also a case study for the employee engagement model. Well, and you're bringing it to life, which I love to see. And we're doing another summit this year, Bob, so maybe we can, because just adding to that, the basis, before we even got the basis of the pyramid here is the communication, the psychological safety, the relationship building, right? So it is true that, and I never even saw this when I wrote this article, right? But it really does reflect my experience. And I think that's where you need folks in organizations and organizational development, because the reality is, not very many people have learned how to work together. And then
Right.
that's the kind of work that I do and that I learned to do in my master's, and that, you might be like, why do I need a person to help? But this is what it is that most of us didn't learn how to work together effectively because, in my opinion, we need systems and maps and processes to be able to do good work together. It's a framework. And one of my mentors said, and that we need these theories as maps. It's not right or wrong. But when I started my process with this committee of people who didn't know each other, I presented a map, like on a PowerPoint. I forget what it's called now, unfortunately, but I used, I used a theoretical map, and I said, this is the journey we're going through. And all it is the basis for us to communicate together. And you have to do that intro meeting. You have to do the round table where every voice is heard, because that's how psychological safety gets created. And especially when you're working across cultures, right? It's one of the things we talk about a lot in our organization. Like, you're in a meeting with people from Uruguay and people from Australia and Lisbon and Portugal, and we have different ways of working, and it's important to acknowledge that we're all human.
Yeah, that's something that we talk a lot about at the diversity movement. Is that there's a practicality to it, but it's not taught. Like, you're not going to even, so you see it a lot with ethics. Some schools have adopted ethics classes, at least, because so much of the world is unethical. Things that organizations do, they either do it purposefully or stumble into unethical situations. So somebody is saying, hey, we should teach students about this early so that they understand the parameters. And I feel like these issues that we've outlined, things like belonging and diversity and trust, certainly psychological safety, these should be taught along with leadership or so-called leadership skills, because this is, in my mind, and you can tell me if you believe me or believe it or not, or maybe you think differently. I don't think that leaders are going to be given the leeway to not focus on these issues in the future. If the demographics continue to play out, because younger generations and younger professionals essentially won't put up with the kind of thing that older generations like me and my predecessors put up with. I could curl your hair with stories about how awful the workplace was, when I was in my 20s and 30s. But I don't expect my daughters, who are college age, to either put up with that or have to go through it, because I do believe that the world has advanced, and that we're taking, even though it seems like with DEI under fire and being used as a political football, people and organizations are still taking these topics incredibly seriously.
Absolutely, and I think that I want to go back to the eye roller who's listening to us somewhere. It's a true elephant in the room that some of these practices and these principles, there's like oh yes, we have to do that. But the purpose of my article and my lived experience is that when you practice these things, psychological safety, relationship building, inclusive leadership, the work is better. Like the work is better and it's more efficient. So you can do it because it's the right thing to do, but you can also do it because it makes work better, right? Like, we do better work. It seems so simple, right? Like, but we also forget. And that's where, you're talking about leadership training, and we do a lot of training, but I'm really interested in the little ways, right? And one of the things of what makes a microcosm, and Adrienne Marie Brown, who I quote in my article, talks about like that ripple effect, right? So if you're a leader and you want to have practice inclusive leadership, like, how do you start your meetings? Do you take the time? You're like, hey, Bob, how are you? How are things going?
Yeah.
Do you take that time? Do you, and this is especially important when we're working virtually because we don't have the water cooler, and that's a whole other conversation. But like, do you know what's going on in your colleagues' lives? Not to like a lot of detail, but are we humans first, And I think that that's an important thing to remember. And the privilege of working globally is like, we're going to make some broad generalizations, but our colleagues in South America are much better at reminding me of this, right? Like you have to have, and I coach clients as well, not just our colleagues, but I'm in service delivery. So I coach our clients as well. And we have 20 minutes. Somebody from America will generally get on the phone and start telling me their problems. And within the first 5 minutes, we're like deep into coaching session. But somebody from South America needs to know where my mother's from. She wants to know where I went to school, what I had for lunch. And they need to feel like we have a human connection before they're ready to tell me their secrets. And that's actually so valid, right? And we need to have this relationship built before we can do good work. And I think that's what belonging is really about. And even if that's in an hour and a half, right? How do you build the relationship in order to do the work? Skipping it is like fast food.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful and interesting. That insight is great. Are we humans first? Is a good question. That should maybe be the main question that they teach in MBA programs. Are we humans first? But the interesting thing, Don Thompson, CEO of the diversity movement, always talks about that these ideas, you get the people who eye roll, who aren't interested. They think it's too squishy or soft or something. But when you put these things together and people feel like they're being treated like a human, and they feel they know their colleagues, and they feel safety and trust, then the work actually is more innovative, more creative, more collaborative, and that leads to better results. So there's definitely a business outcome to all this. That's I'm sure you saw it in the work that you were doing for the summit. The fact that you were also engaged.
And there's that famous case. I mean, absolutely, because the other thing we don't mention, these people like were doing this work on top of their regular jobs. Right. So you already have to have, we had a fairly engaged employee base for people to volunteer and do this. They were given work time to do it. But the reality is, I know, even though I told them not to, that they worked outside of their paid time. Like that's really engaged. We don't encourage that. But they wanted to do a good job. And like that's engagement, right? Because they felt so strongly that what we were doing mattered. And that was because we were trusted to do the thing. That's because people gave us time, right? People in our organizations came and spoke to us and answered our questions and said, like, we trust you to do this. And so then people took that seriously because, we also already, we picked from a basis of intelligent, well-trained folks who are already working for us and are already engaged, but they volunteered to do this. And do you know Bob, there's this famous like case study about, it's in like some engineering thing where that's it. Employees didn't feel safe to talk about the problems. And then it ended up like, I think it was in aerospace. Have you heard about this case study? And psychological safety is so important because the person was sure that there was an error in the engineering, but they were afraid to speak up because their manager didn't listen to them time and time again. And then it ended up causing an accident or causing something. And so, yeah, it's not just a cushy thing. It's really important that people feel safe to be able to ask questions, and to be able to disagree. And, we had, and just, in part of the summit, I invited Susie from the diversity movement to set the tone at the beginning, and that's part of communication, creating psychological safety. I had a 5-day summit, thanks to the infinite wisdom of my academic advisor and my mentor, Maya. It's like, okay, well, you need to spend the first day just establishing the basis. And in a world, in a corporate, capitalistic world, that's a waste of time, right? Like we got to do the work. These people are being paid. I mean, we have SLAs and but this is it. I said, this is what we need. And I was trusted, right? And I think that my experiment proved itself. And this also, the same thing is true for my experience being onboarded at WPO. Part of the reason I felt like I belonged so much is I was like, courted, for lack of a better word. My onboarding was slow. I was in that, like, I was trained. I met different people. I was given a lot of resources. We have, we're on the coaching team. We have success coaches. It was made clear to me very from the get-go that it was okay for me to fail. Obviously, performance management is something different, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but to be given that space, I mean, it's not universal. Let's just say it that way, without jumping down the capitalist system throat too much. But it's not that those aren't universal traits. And the things that you're saying, sometimes things don't make obvious sense on a spreadsheet, but they make a lot of sense on the ground. And that's what your article really brings out, that when people have some basic needs. Okay, so you tell me if I've gone too far, and you can explain it within the confines of the article. When people come together for a collective task or challenge, and they feel like they had their basic needs as human beings coincide or being fostered in some way in that process, the end result ends up better. That's what I got out of your article. You tell me, did I read too much into it? Is that semi on track, or am I off track?
That's absolutely right. And those people, so even before that, everybody in the room has to feel like they're valued. Their opinions are valued and their perspectives are valued, and that they have an opportunity to be heard. It doesn't mean that we're going to do what they say. It just means that they're heard, right? But even before that, the right people have to be in the room. And that's this other aspect, is that so often decision happens, from what's the metaphor, but like from the, the box seats. So it's not the people that are down playing the game. Maybe there's one person that gets asked their opinion, but that's the important thing. And then in our sense, right, because we have this global organization that is so multifaceted and we have so many different departments and the intricacies, we needed people from these different places, because it's fascinating just to watch them talk. I mean, just getting people, every time I get together in a cross-functional team, to watch people speak and be like, oh, well, this is the, information is transferring that way, so that we can have that diversity of perspectives. And then when people know that they've been curated for that, even, I think it gives them even more, like, your voice is needed, right? You're here for a reason, because we want to hear from you.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And one of the things that WPO has done recently is establish a partnership with Judy Ravin of Accents International. And she helps both organizations like NATO, big companies, and their employees understand how to communicate better, particularly when it comes to accents, without feeling that you're just handing over your culture to somebody else. And it's really fascinating stuff when she explains, there's a business critical function where if somebody essentially doesn't think about the person that they're talking to and how they're communicating, they may mishear. The person may say something, and if they don't have the psychological safety to ask, excuse me, I didn't understand what you said, could you repeat that? Bad things can happen. You think like a pharmacy company or a pharmaceutical. So there's even the aspect of down to how people hear one another, which is also part of this. And you see that even more when it's people from different backgrounds, different ideologies, different thought processes. So as another very interesting piece or facet of your article in bringing these people from different lived experiences together and different cultures.
And I mean, language is such a huge component of our understanding. And it's one of my great loves, because language has so much implication behind it. And that's one piece, right? So the language that we use, are we really understanding each other? The more contentious the topic, the more we need to over communicate around language. And then what does belonging look like in practice? It looks like, giving people time. If people are giving you the luxury of meeting with you in their third or fourth language, like, can you give them the materials ahead of time? What time is your meeting at? Is it always in EST? And that was a big thing that we worked on this summit. It was like, okay, where's the time that, is going to be the least inconvenient? Because there's such a, almost like, we fall back to English and we fall back to EST or wherever a head office is. But those are the aspects, that make people feel seen and heard, and all these little things. And I think about it from hosting, like, in my life outside of work, I love to host dinner parties. I love to have people over. I love to, and Priya Parker, who wrote, I think it's called The Art of, no, it's not called The Art of Hosting, Bringing People Together. Have you read it, Priya Parker?
Nope.
I'll look it up, but The Art of Gathering, that's what it is. Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering. Like, a meeting is ultimately a gathering. Like, why are we treating them like it's a car wash? Like, we're gathering. And I know there's a bunch of meetings that could have been emails, but what if you walked into every meeting like, it's a privilege to be here with you guys? And I think that is what creates belonging, is our attitude behind the gathering. Like, that was a tangent, but
No, it's right on track with what we're talking about. It's belonging is so important. And I read somewhere, and I can't quote where I read it, one of the many, many, many studies I read, that basically they boiled it down to what employees want. And what employees want is they want to understand what their manager expects of them. And that's pretty simple. I mean, I manage people, and what they want to know essentially is, how can I be successful so that our trust increases, our ability to collaborate increases, that I'm, working toward the aspirations and the goals that we've set. I mean, when you start treating people, as you said, like humans and not little robots or automatons of some sort, I just see good things happening. And your article is definitely a demonstration of those ideologies or philosophies, or if anything, just a great case study there.
And I think that, there's a tendency to be like, oh, well, what does it mean? Everybody always has an example of, like, especially when we talk about generation, I don't know, X or Z or wherever we're at, like, there's this sort of cliche of like, oh, I can't come to work because my energy is like, that's not what we mean, right? That's one far extreme. And yes, that exists, but having a relationship of psychological safety and having somebody understand what's expected of them, we're just saying, how are you? And asking questions like, how would you like to receive feedback? Is this working for you? Like, communicating with your employees so that they feel seen and heard, and or the people that you're having a meeting with, right? And also, something my team lead here at WPO does so well is, like, reinforcing positive behavior. I should ask him. I don't know if he does that just for me or for everybody, but when I was hired, I think somebody had a conversation with me about, how do you like to be led? How do you like to receive feedback? And I said, I need a lot of positive reinforcement. I know myself, like, I'm in my mid-30s. Like, I want to be, I'm basically like a puppy. I want to be said, like, oh, you're doing so good. But it really works, because he does this so well that when he needs to tell me this isn't working and you need to do better, he doesn't need to sugarcoat it. He says, this isn't working and you need to do better. And because we have this psychological safety that he spends way more time telling me how great I am, I'm just like, yeah, you're right. I need to do this better. Sorry. And it's over. It's done. We're moving it on. Or I say, I need your help to do this better. This is what I need. And he says, okay, let's look at that. It's really that simple, right, Bob? It's not, we're making things more
Yeah.
complicated than I think in workplaces, we tend to make things complicated, but like clear, kind, direct communication. Be humans first.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that the Center for Organizational Effectiveness does so well, the WPO does so well, is we use data to dig out these very human challenges that people face, and then we create programs to solve those problems. In the United States, in the latest psychological safety study, workplace trauma was the number one barrier to psychological safety, followed by work-life balance and conflict with manager. So, I mean, we know half of the things that three-fourths of the things that you and I have talked about today, we didn't throw data into the mix. But the data leads us to the kind of things that we're talking about. How do you build a sense of belonging? How do you build psychological safety? How do you bring people from disparate backgrounds together? So I find a lot of value in these kind of conversations because the fact that you wrote the article in a case study format, that's where the rubber meets the road. Like it's a case study that demonstrates there can be success in this kind of environment that can often be very difficult if you're not paying attention to the kinds of things, certainly belonging and others, the points that you raised. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important.
And I think the truth is too, just to acknowledge like everybody who's listening is like, everybody is really busy and we're all really busy. But if you're a leader and you're wondering, well, how can I do this? How can I create more belonging? There are tons of case studies out there. There are tons of books. There are tons of theory. And as a coach, I work with my executive clients and I say, well, where's your leadership development time? Like you spend all this time developing your employees. Where's your leadership development time? Like, do you have an hour a week to read something interesting about how you want to evolve your leadership? And most people are like, wow, I haven't done that for years, because people are busy and they have so much on their shoulders. And I know they like, there's a lot going on, and can you make it a practice to like put yourself outside? Because this is what happens. I don't think I'm naive, right? I don't believe that people are purposely alienating their employees. I don't believe that. I think they're just busy and we're trying to get the job done and we're, under a lot of pressure and we momentarily forget.
Yeah, I think that we forget. So I'll be joking around with people and they'll explain something where two people had a disagreement or whatever. I'm like, well, what do you expect? We're complex animals. And that's all we are. We're animals with larger brains and capacity to do things that sometimes are great and sometimes are not great. And we fall back on bad habits, and it takes time and effort to change those habits and all these things. We slap an organization around and stuff people into buildings and into remote situations. And of course, screws are going to fall out of holes and things are going to happen.
But you wouldn't ever design a building. I mean, some people do, but you wouldn't design a building before having plans first, right? But that's what we do. We throw teams together and then we start working, but we don't have a plan. And I think that's my understanding of what organizational development is, and how I think what I'm saying is like, can we be thoughtful about when we start a project, who needs to be part of this project? Okay, we've gathered these people, and then how do we want to work together? And yes, that takes a little bit longer, but ultimately, and the purpose of the article, I think, is to say that doing those steps in however much detail as you would like, it just makes the work better.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's the
like who should be here?
Yeah.
And how should we work together? That's like basically, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. I mean, obviously that's a simplification, Bob, but
yeah, I mean, it's we're simplifying it because that's what makes it understandable, and people can see the value there, and they can go to the article and get more detail as needed. And as you said, there are lots of other books and articles and probably YouTube channels dedicated to these kind of things. And so I've kept you long enough today. And I've enjoyed every single minute of this conversation because I love having these conversations. Is there anything from the article that we've missed or left out that we can entice listeners to go out and find the article? Anything we've overlooked?
I think I think we've covered, the basic thesis, right? Or just this basic idea that we do better work together, which is an oversimplification. But a big part of it too, I think, is slowing down a little bit, which is so easy to say. But this conversation is a perfect example, right? You and I have full inboxes, got a lot of stuff to do. It's towards the end of the day. But I'll just speak for myself. I feel more engaged after spending this hour talking to you, right? I feel more excited to go back to do the work that I'm doing. For us to take a moment from away from the busyness of our lives and talk about how and why we do the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a microcosm, right? You and I are going to go out to our days now, and we're going to interact with people. Like, my energy is higher after speaking to you than it was when I started the meeting. So I feel like I've just proven my point again.
Yeah. And, the reason I wanted to do this podcast is because I wanted to celebrate your success. I mean, this is not something that it may seem like a lot of people do it, but in the scope of the world, it's not something that a lot of people do to publish something of this stature in a great journal. So people who are interested, I have this up on the screen. It's Organization Development Review. It's the Journal of the Organization Development Network. It is the Spring 25 issue, Volume 57, Number 1. I would say if you have access to a library, certainly they could get this for you very easily through interlibrary loan, or probably a lot of electronic databases have subscription to this journal. And Rivkah, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me today. Very just energized. I have new perspectives on belonging coming out of this conversation. So I just want to say thanks and congratulations again.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. It was a pleasure for me too. And I really hope that maybe we'll do more of this kind of thing, and and have more to talk about.
Okay. Thanks a lot, listeners. Go out and find Organization Development Review 2025, Volume 57, Number 1. Great article, A Microcosm of Belonging Amidst Global Multilingual Organization by Rivkah Sherman. And thanks for being here. And until next time, bye-bye.